Once upon a time in Lagos, there lived a man everyone called Mr. Smelly Mouth. His real name was Mark Ogene, and he owned one of the most popular car stands on the island. Mark was a successful businessman, rich, well-known, and very outgoing. But heaven knows that talking to him was like sentencing your nose to death. The smell from his mouth was not ordinary. It was a dangerous mixture of expired beans, seaweed, and rotten eggs all in one. People struggled to listen to him. Even when Mark was making sense, the odor from his mouth made it impossible to concentrate. Mark, however, was a proud man. He loved showing off his wealth, and because of what people stood to gain from him, they endured the torture that came from his mouth. In just 2 years, Mark had been in relationships with more than 7 women. None of them lasted more than 2 months. In fact, one lady dated him for just 1 week and landed in the hospital. The poor girl had held her breath for so long that she fainted. But Mark didn't know he had a terrible mouth odor. Nobody had the courage to tell him. He believed people avoided him because they were intimidated by his success and confidence. In his mind, people envied him, but in truth, they were just protecting their nostrils. Sometimes, customers would suddenly leave in the middle of a negotiation. Mark would call them jobless time wasters who had nothing better to do. What he didn't know was that his breath was the reason they all ran away. One evening, a serious fight broke out in front of his car stand. 2 men were dragging each other on the ground, shouting and tearing their clothes. A crowd gathered, cheering as they fought. Mark rushed out of his office, shouting, "Stop that nonsense this minute!" He walked up to the men, trying to separate them. To everyone's surprise, the fight stopped instantly. One of the men dropped his fists and began coughing, waving his hand in the air. The other man also stepped back and began gasping for breath. Within seconds, the 2 enemies walked away peacefully, leaving the crowd in shock. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Wait, did this man's mouth just end the fight?" Everyone burst into laughter. Mark, however, thought he was cheering for his leadership skills. He walked back into his office proudly, chest out, feeling like a hero. What he didn't know was that it wasn't his authority that stopped the fight. It was his mouth that did what no one else could do. The next afternoon, a popular politician visited his car stand to buy some cars. Mark came out smiling widely as he greeted the man. "Good afternoon, sir," he shouted excitedly, stretching his hand for a handshake. The politician smiled politely and said he wanted to buy 10 exotic cars. Mark, overjoyed, began to speak rapidly. Within seconds, the politician's smile vanished. His face changed and he began coughing and stepping backwards. Unable to stand the foul smell, the man whispered to his assistant, "You handle the negotiation." But Mark, completely unaware of what was going on, leaned closer to offer him a discount. The politician quickly shouted, "No need for discount, just give me 10 cars." He turned to his assistant and said, "Finalize the payment," before walking away. Mark stood there in shock at how easily he had closed the deal. He smiled proudly, calling himself the smartest marketer in Lagos, not knowing that the politician only did what he did to survive the odor. Mark continued to live in ignorance, believing his charm and wisdom were the reasons for his success. But soon, his life was about to take a new turn. One sunny afternoon, a beautiful young woman named Juliet visited his car stand. Juliet was tall, light-skinned, and elegant. Her long lashes fluttered like butterfly wings, and her perfume could make a room sigh. But Juliet wasn't there to buy a car. She had heard stories about Mark, that he was the best car dealer in Lagos and extremely wealthy. When she heard filthy rich, Juliet's mind was made up. She was going to make him hers by all means. Her friends tried to warn her. "Juliet, that man's mouth can kill a mosquito in mid-air," one of her friends, Grace, said. Juliet only smiled and replied,
Money has its own perfume. That day, she walked into Mark's car stand wearing her best dress and sweetest smile. But when Mark saw her, he almost fainted. Juliet was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She was like a goddess. Her heart skipped beats. He walked towards her with a wide grin, his teeth flashing. But when he opened his mouth to speak, Juliet's soul almost left her body. The smell hit her so hard that she nearly saw her ancestors waving at her. Still, Juliet managed to smile through it all, holding her breath like a deep-sea diver. "Good afternoon, sir," she said politely, her eyes watering. "Would you like to test drive our new model?" Mark asked, stepping closer. Juliet immediately took 3 steps back, almost tripping on her heels. Mark rushed to steady her, and she forced another smile. By the end of the day, Juliet had agreed to go on a date with him, not because she loved him, but because her greed was stronger than her sense of smell. That evening, her friend Grace called. "Baby girl, how did it go?" Juliet coughed twice before replying, "It was successful. But if I die, please tell the world I died for the money." The next evening, Mark took Juliet to one of the most expensive restaurants on the island. She wore a tight red gown that hugged her curves. Mark couldn't take his eyes off her. As he began to talk, the smell hit her again like a leaking gas pipe. Her eyes watered, her nose burned, and she almost ran out of the restaurant. But the thought of wealth kept her glued to her seat. "You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," Mark said softly. Juliet forced a weak smile. "And you, sir, are the most unforgettable man I have ever met." By the end of the evening, Mark was already in love. Juliet played her part well, pretending to love him too. Within a few months, Mark proposed and Juliet said yes. Not for love, but for luxury. Their wedding was the talk of Lagos. Everyone came to see the woman who finally agreed to marry Mr. Smelly Mouth. The hall was filled with guests, musicians, and curious onlookers. When the pastor finally said, "You may now kiss the bride," the entire crowd leaned forward in suspense. But before Mark could move, Juliet started coughing badly. Her bridesmaids rushed her to the restroom. Everyone knew why she ran. Mark stood there, worried, thinking she was sick. He had no idea she was fighting for her life against his breath. That night, inside their hotel suite, Mark looked at his new bride with love in his eyes. He vowed to protect her, to make her happy, and to give her everything she wanted. He gifted her a brand new car as a wedding present and moved her into his mansion. Juliet smiled sweetly in public, but in private, she was a different person. She could barely stand her husband. Every time he opened his mouth, she frowned or shouted at him. Then one evening, it finally happened. The day Mark's heart broke. He had spent the whole day planning a romantic dinner for his wife. He cooked her favorite meal, bought her perfume, decorated the dining table with roses and candles, and dressed neatly in white. When Juliet came downstairs and saw everything, she froze. Mark smiled proudly and said, "My love, you've brought light into my life. I may not be perfect, but every day I thank God for giving me someone like you." Her heart softened a little. She walked to him, smiling faintly, and opened the gift box he handed her. Inside was a sparkling diamond bracelet. "You deserve the world," Mark said lovingly as he leaned forward to hug her. That was the moment it happened again. The smell hit her like thunder. Her smile vanished. She pushed him away and screamed, "Mark, please, enough. I can't do this anymore." Mark froze. "What do you mean?" Tears filled his eyes. "Your mouth," she shouted. "It smells horrible. I can't breathe when you talk. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm dying here." Silence filled the room. The candles flickered. Mark's face went blank. For years, people had mocked him secretly, but hearing it from his wife, the woman he loved, broke him completely. He sat down quietly while Juliet walked away. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room thinking about his life. The laughter, the avoidance, the strange looks. Everything made sense now. By morning, Mark made a decision. He was going to fix it, no matter what.
That night, Mark could barely sleep. Every word Juliet said echoed in his mind. Your mouth smells horrible. I can't breathe when you talk. Those words stabbed him again and again like sharp needles. By morning, his heart was heavy, but he had made up his mind. He was going to fix it. He rushed into the bathroom and spent hours brushing his teeth. He brushed with so much anger that his gums began to bleed. He gargled mouthwash, chewed mints, and even used lemon and salt, hoping the smell would disappear. When he was done, he smiled into the mirror, took a deep breath, and said to himself, "Finally, it's gone." Later that morning, Juliet came downstairs, dragging her slippers lazily. She found Mark in the kitchen, wearing an apron and humming softly as he flipped pancakes. The aroma of fried eggs filled the room. "Good morning, my queen," he said proudly. "I made breakfast for you." Juliet forced a smile and sat down, still upset from the previous night. Mark served her food and said excitedly, "Taste it, my love. I made it myself." Juliet hesitated. The moment she picked her fork, she felt it again, that same invisible wave of doom creeping towards her. Her nostrils twitched, the air shifted, and just as Mark opened his mouth to say, "Is it too hot?" the smell hit her again like a gas leak. She dropped her fork, coughed, and stood up suddenly. "Oh God, not again," she cried as she covered her nose. "Mark, please, I beg you, don't talk when I'm eating." Mark froze, confused and embarrassed. He watched her walk out of the dining room, leaving the food untouched. He sat there silently, staring at the pancakes that suddenly looked tasteless. That was the beginning of Mark's quiet suffering. He became obsessed with fixing his breath. Every morning he tried a new toothpaste. He bought expensive mouthwash, herbal mixtures, and local remedies. But nothing worked. Sometimes he would brush 10 times a day until his mouth went dry, yet Juliet still complained. One evening, Juliet returned home and found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by toothpaste tubes, brushes, and mouthwash bottles. His eyes were red and tired. "What is all this, Mark?" she asked coldly. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes. I just want to be free, Juliet. Tell me what else I can do. I've tried everything." Juliet sighed, shaking her head. "You've done enough," she said dismissively, and walked away to her room. But Mark wasn't ready to give up. The next day, he drove straight to the hospital. He met 3 different doctors that day and explained everything in detail. They ran tests, examined his mouth, gums, and throat. Hours later, one of the doctors returned with a puzzled expression. "Mr. Ogechi," the doctor said carefully, "we found nothing wrong with you." Mark blinked. "Nothing wrong?" "Yes, your oral hygiene is perfect. No infection, no decay, no smell that we can detect. In fact, your breath is quite normal." Mark stared at him in disbelief. "Normal? Doctor, if my breath is normal, why do people run away when I talk? Why did my wife almost collapse during our wedding?" The doctor looked helpless. "Maybe it's psychological?" he said softly. Mark shook his head. "No, doctor, something is wrong, something beyond science." He left the hospital that day more confused than ever. When he got home, Juliet barely spoke to him. She now slept in a separate room and texted him whenever she needed something. She even bought her own cutlery, claiming she didn't want her mouth bacteria near her food. The once proud Mark, the man who laughed loudly, made jokes, and commanded attention, became quiet and withdrawn.
At his car stand, he no longer spoke directly to customers. His assistant, Henry, now handled most of the negotiations, while Mark just approved sales with a nod. He had become a shadow of himself. At night, when Juliet slept, Mark would sit alone in the living room, brushing his teeth again and again until his gums bled. Then he would stare at the mirror and whisper, "God, if this is punishment, please forgive me." But no answer came. One Sunday morning, while sitting quietly in his office, his old friend Kunle came to visit. Kunle had known Mark since childhood. When he saw how lean and quiet Mark had become, he grew worried. "Mark, what's going on?" Kunle asked gently. Mark sighed. "Kunle, my life is finished. My wife can't stand me. People avoid me. I've spent money on doctors and mouthwash, but still the smell refuses to go. Tell me the truth, you knew about it, didn't you?" Kunle looked away. "I didn't know how to say it, my brother. I thought you knew already." Mark's eyes filled with tears. "Do you know how it feels to be hated for something you don't even understand?" Kunle shook his head sadly. Then he said, "Mark, there's one last option, a spiritual woman in Ijegun. People say she helps with strange problems, things science can't explain. She's very powerful." At first, Mark didn't believe him, but desperation can make a man do the unthinkable. That night, he packed his bag and decided to go see her. By morning, he set out for Ijegun. The road was long and the road rough. After hours of searching for the address Kunle gave him, he stopped by the roadside to ask for directions. That was when fate struck. A large truck suddenly lost control and rammed into Mark's car. The crash was so loud that villagers nearby came running. They found Mark unconscious, bleeding, and trapped behind the wheel. He was rushed to a nearby hospital where doctors fought hard to save his life. When Juliet received the news, she showed no emotion. She simply said, "Oh, okay," and continued scrolling through her phone. In her heart, she hoped he never returned. For weeks, Mark lay in the hospital, unconscious. His face was swollen, his body covered in bruises. Nurses watched over him day and night. Then one evening, his eyes slowly opened. His lips moved weakly. "Take it off," he whispered. The nurse leaned closer. "Sir, what did you say?" Mark's voice cracked. "Take it off, please. Take off the ring." She looked down and saw a thick gold ring on his right finger. The ring had a strange black stone that gleamed faintly under the light. It looked old but well polished. The nurse tried to remove it, but it refused to come off. She pulled again, harder this time. After several tries, it finally slid off his finger. The moment the ring left his skin, his body relaxed, his breathing became normal again, and he fainted back into a deep sleep. When he woke up hours later, something was different. For the first time in years, he felt fresh air flow from his mouth. He exhaled and there was no smell, not even a trace. Mark was healed. He didn't know it yet, but that ring had been the source of his curse. Years ago, before Mark was born, his father, Mr. Algene Sr., had made a deal with a dark charm maker. The man promised him wealth and success in business. In exchange, the charm would take something valuable from him or his bloodline. The charm was sealed inside a gold ring with a black stone. Mark's father became rich, but suffered strange illnesses until he died. Mark, unaware of the ring's dark origin, took it as a remembrance of his father. He wore it every single day, even in the shower, in bed, and at work. He believed it brought him luck, but unknown to him, It carried a curse that replaced his father's sickness with a stench that would torment his own life. While Mark lay in the hospital, he had a strange dream. He saw his father standing in a foggy field. "My son, you must destroy the ring. It was the price I paid for wealth. I thought I was buying success, but I bought sorrow. The ring gives riches, but it takes peace from its wearer. Break it before it ruins you completely." Mark's eyes widened. "Father, all this time you mean this ring caused everything?" His father nodded sadly. "Yes, my son. The curse moves through the bloodline until someone ends it. You must destroy it or pass it on. But remember, whoever wears it must pay with something precious." Mark woke up sweating, breathing heavily. He stared at his finger, now bare, and called for the nurse. "Please bring me that ring," he said. She handed him the small object sealed in a plastic.
Mark stood in the dark, listening. He closed his eyes and sighed. He had already lost his pride, his happiness, his love. Now his wife was planning to rob him. But that night, Mark made a plan. If Juliet wanted wealth, she would get it. Every bit of it. The next morning, he took the gold ring from his drawer and locked it in a small wooden box. As he paced around the house, pretending to be on a phone call, he spoke loudly enough for Juliet to hear. "Yes, yes," he said. "Those items are my life's treasure, especially that ring, my father's gift before he died. They tried to steal it during my accident. I was lucky to get it back. I can't live without it." Juliet froze behind the wall, listening carefully. Her eyes lit up with greed. Mark continued, No, I can't sell it. That ring is the secret to my wealth. Once someone wears it, they'll never lack money again." Juliet's lips curved into a wicked smile. That night, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing. "A ring that brings wealth," she whispered to herself. "That must be worth millions." The next day, Mark pretended as if everything was normal. He hummed while eating his breakfast and smiled kindly whenever Juliet spoke. But she was restless. Every time he looked away, her eyes darted toward his room door. That evening, Mark stepped outside, pretending to take a call. He stayed out for almost an hour, giving her the perfect chance. The moment she heard the main door close, Juliet ran straight into his room. She searched under the bed, inside the wardrobe, and through his drawers, until she finally found it, a small wooden box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside lay the golden ring with the black stone, gleaming faintly under the light. Juliet stared at the ring in her trembling hand. It was more beautiful than she imagined, heavy, shiny, and royal. The black stone at its center seemed to breathe with a faint light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Her lips parted in awe. "So this is the secret to his wealth," she whispered. "No wonder he's rich." She looked around quickly, afraid Mark would walk in, then closed the box and slipped the ring into her purse. Her heart pounded wildly as she tiptoed out of the room. That night, Mark returned to find the wooden box empty. He froze. For a moment, he stood still, then quietly sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "So she finally took it." There was no anger in his voice, only sorrow. He knew what would follow. His father's spirit had warned him, whoever takes the ring will pay with their mind. The next morning, Juliet was gone. She left no note, no goodbye. Her wardrobe was half empty. Her phone was switched off. Even the guards at the gate said she had left in the night with 2 suitcases and a taxi. Mark didn't chase her. He only looked out the window and murmured, "May God have mercy on your soul, Juliet." Days turned into weeks.
Mark tried to live quietly. He sold parts of his car business, donated money to a children's home, and began attending church. His face was calmer, but his eyes were full of sadness. He knew the curse had only changed hands. Meanwhile, Juliet had traveled far away to Enugu. Nobody there knew her past. She changed her hairstyle, her phone number, and even her name. She now called herself Madam J. She rented a fine apartment and opened a fashion shop using some of Mark's stolen money. Business grew quickly. Her shop was always full of customers, and her beauty made men flock around her. "Madam J, you are shining, no," her neighbor Esther often said. Juliet laughed proudly. "When money speaks, beauty listens," she replied. But deep down, she never forgot the ring. Every night she would bring it out of her drawer and stare at it under the lamp. She wanted to wear it, but she remembered Mark's strange words that morning. Still, greed whispered in her ear, "If this ring brought him wealth, why shouldn't it bring you more?" One Saturday evening, she stood before her mirror, admiring herself in a glittering gown. "I deserve more," she told her reflection. "Mark wasted this ring. I'll use it better." With a deep breath, she slid the ring onto her finger. At first, nothing happened. She smiled, spinning around. "See, nothing. It's just an ordinary ring." But as she admired it, she noticed the black stone glow faintly, like an eye opening. A soft wind blew through her room, even though the windows were closed. She shivered, then laughed nervously and went to bed. The next morning, strange things began. Her shop, which was always filled with customers, suddenly became empty. One woman who came to buy a dress took one sniff and covered her nose immediately. "Madam, what's that smell?" she asked, stepping back. Juliet frowned. "What smell?" "It's like something rotting," the woman said, rushing out. Juliet sniffed the air. She didn't perceive anything. But as she opened her mouth to call her sales girl, the girl winced and turned her face away. "Madam, maybe you should chew mint." Juliet's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" The girl didn't answer. She packed her bag and ran out, leaving Juliet alone in the shop. By evening, Juliet noticed that every time she spoke, people avoided her. Even the Okada riders refused to carry her. Confused, she went home and brushed her teeth over and over again, rinsing her mouth with mouthwash, but the smell refused to go. The next day, she woke up feeling dizzy. The mirror before her bed looked foggy, and when she looked closer, she gasped. Her reflection was smiling at her even though she wasn't smiling. "Who are you?" she whispered. The reflection whispered back, "I am what you wanted to be." Juliet screamed and fell backward. The ring on her finger burned like fire. She tried to pull it off, but it wouldn't move. The more she tugged, the tighter it became. "Help! Somebody help me!" she cried, running out of her apartment. Neighbors gathered around her, watching her struggle and scream. "Madam J, what's wrong?" one of them asked. Juliet fell to the ground, laughing and crying at the same time. "It's mine! The ring is mine! I deserve it!" she shouted, clutching her hand. Her laughter grew louder and louder until it turned into screams. Her hair scattered, her eyes turned wild, and she began to roll on the floor, shouting Mark's name. That night, her neighbors called the police. They found her sitting in a corner, mumbling to herself, with her clothes torn and the cursed ring still glowing on her finger. By the next morning, she was taken to a psychiatric hospital. The doctor said she was mentally unstable. She no longer recognized anyone, not even herself. People whispered different stories. Some said she went mad because she stole her husband's wealth. Others said she was possessed. But those who knew the truth, those who had heard about Mark Ogeni, understood that the curse had finally completed its circle. When Mark heard the news later, he sat quietly for a long time. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, "I warned you, Juliet." He drove to a quiet riverside in Ogun State with a small parcel in his hands. Inside was a black stone, the very heart of the ring, which he had finally managed to break into 2 pieces after many nights of prayer. He dropped it into the water and said softly, "No more greed, no more pain." The water swallowed it, and the wind grew calm. From that day, Mark lived a quiet, humble life. He never remarried. He opened a foundation for people with mental illness, naming it the Juliet Hope Home. When people asked why, he would smile gently and say, "Because I once loved someone who lost her mind chasing wealth that wasn't hers." And so, the story of Mr. Smelly Mouth ended. A story that began with pride, grew with greed, and ended with madness. For the people of Lagos who knew him, it became a lesson whispered for years. Not every rich man is blessed, and not every shining thing is meant to be won.